County Communications, Crenshaw.
My name is Dennis Fig, and I'm a retired detective in New York City. I run the security for World Wrestling, and one of our wrestlers that lives down there is missing, and he told me to say we need a welfare check done.
And what's his name?
Chris Benoit. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a message.
Hello, 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 my lovely people, and welcome back to Addie's World. My name is DIDNT. If you've been here before, thank you so much for coming back. If not, sit down, relax, grab a drink. If you like what you see, maybe stay to the end of the video and think about hitting that subscribe button and making sure your bell is on for all upcoming notifications. Okay guys, what do you think of the new intro? This is just going to be for the True Crime Thursdays. Oh, welcome to True Crime Thursday. This is my first official True Crime Thursday that's going to be released on Thursday. So, I am going to put a viewer's discretion right here, guys. This is a case where it's a murder-suicide of a mother and father and a 9-year-old child. I will just barely touch on how people were killed, and as I say, this is a 9-year-old child, so if you take offense, I have no problem. You do not have to watch this, but I just wanted to put it there at the very start, just to warn you. The case I'm going to be talking about today is actually a WWE/F pro wrestler by the name of Chris Benoit. On the 25th of June 2007, there was a 911 call made to Familicide in Georgia to the police department there, requesting a welfare check on Chris, his wife Nancy, and their 9-year-old child Daniel. Chris hadn't been in contact with the WWE or anyone he was wrestling with at the time. He hadn't been in contact in over 24 hours, and this was Monday night, or this was Monday during the day in Corpus Christi, and I don't know if you know, I didn't really know, but I've heard of Monday Night Raw. This was going on, there was matches to be played. He hadn't shown up, and he wasn't in contact. So they did request a welfare check, and a police deputy by the name of Larry Alden went out to the house. And he was from Georgia, he was from Fayetteville himself. He had seen Chris Benoit in the gym sometimes, but he didn't really know him or know much about him. And when they got there, there was another policeman with him. A neighbour came out and they were like, oh, we're just doing a welfare check. Have you seen Grace or Nancy or Daniel? And she did note that they hadn't been seen in about 3 or 4 days. And there was 2 massive big German shepherds out kind of roaming around in the garden kind of yard they had. The neighbour knew them, and she's like, oh, you know, I'm fine, I'll take them, they know me, I have a good relationship with them. So she took them inside, and the deputy was like, it's taking a bit longer just to get the dogs out the way. The neighbour went into the house, started screaming when she came out, and she said, Daniel is dead, he's dead in his bed. When the police officers entered the house, guns drawn as you would expect, they entered the house and found Daniel, the 9-year-old, dead in his bed with a Bible placed beside him. Upon further inspection, they then found Nancy, his mother, tied up, also dead, and again another Bible. And as they were searching through the house, they then went down to the home gym. And the way Larry Alden describes it is that it was full of mirrors, like a gym would be full of mirrors. And they both came in from different sides. The 2 cops came in from different sides, and the other one drew his weapon and he was like, hands up, because they could see Chris Benoit sitting down in one of the machines. He thought he was alive, but Larry Alden said he's not. He had sat on one of his machines, a lap machine, there was a cord around his neck, and he was also dead. So guys, this is going to be a kind of rundown of what, why, how and when, and again we're going to bring it back to the start, and we're going to talk about Chris Benoit and what led to this case nearly bringing down the whole of pro wrestling, all the WWEs, everything that came out of it. This case nearly took this down, so we're going to go back and we're going to take it step by step and see what led to this decision. Okay guys, what we know about Chris Benoit. Christopher Michael Benoit was born in Quebec and Montreal in Canada on the 21st of May 1967. Parents were Michael and Margaret, and they lived in Edmonton. It was here when he was, I think, 12, they said, that he went to his first wrestling match. His dad took him to his first wrestling match. And who he saw in this match was a wrestler by the name of the Dynamite Kid, who had a very famous move which was called the flying headbutt. Remember the flying headbutt? From here, Chris was obsessed. This is what Chris wanted to do. He knew he could do it. He wanted to do it. And he worked really, really hard to do it. Back in the day, this was kind of around the time, I don't know if anyone is very interested in wrestling. I know when I was younger, my dad used to have it on, but not much. But I just remember The Undertaker, and he scared the ever-living shit out of me. And the fucker only retired a few years ago, so he was still going. But it was around the time that you needed to be so tall, you needed to be full of muscles, you needed to be this big, and Chris wasn't. Chris was kind of a slighter guy, as in height-wise, and he really, really worked hard to build up these muscles, train, and where he went to train actually was, I don't know if you know the Hart family. They're very big up in wrestling. I think I know them from, God, that Total Bellas program. It was Natalia Hart, but it's Stu Hart and all these. They're kind of like high dynasty within the wrestling community. They had a training camp and it was called the Dungeon, and it was in Stu Hart's basement, and Chris went, signed up and trained so hard. He was kind of quoted as being one of the most brilliant and technical wrestlers, kind of just learning the art and perfecting the art. He was also said to have been really hard on himself. I think it was quoted in one of the matches he missed time something, and it wasn't a big deal. Like, the wrestler he was fighting him was like, oh, it's fine, like, don't worry about it. But he then found Chris in a back room doing squats, and he was like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I fucked up, I have to do these. And the other wrestler was like, oh, did you get given out to? Is that what you're doing? He goes, no, I just need to know not to do it again. So you can kind of see Chris was so hard on himself. He wanted to be the best of the best, and he genuinely worked so hard for it. So from here, kind of around 1985, he began to be a professional wrestler, and in 1986 he actually went to Japan, and this is called the New Japan Pro Wrestling Tournament. And grueling schedule, fights all the time, but it was here Chris then decided he wanted to also incorporate the flying headbutt into his matches. Which basically, if you don't know what a flying headbutt was, it's basically when, I'll try to put a picture here, but it's where they stand at the very corner of the ring or on the top ropes of the ring while their opponent is on the ground, and basically you jump spread eagle on top of them, supposedly knocking them out with a headbutt. Pow! Yeah, so this is what Chris adopted into his routine, or as a move in his wrestling kind of status. He took it so seriously. When he went in 1986, he actually spent a year improving his skills with some of the boxers or some of the wrestlers from the New Japan community. So he actually spent a year extra learning to fight, kind of enhancing his abilities and really understanding the art of professional wrestling. And it was here he met Eddie Guerrero. Again, I'll put a picture up here of Eddie. Now, Eddie Guerrero was, again, Guerrero family is quite big in boxing, I know, but Eddie's wife was Vicky, and she remembers Eddie ringing at the time when him and Chris were over in Japan, and Eddie would be quoted saying, not this prick again, you know, he's so arrogant, he really gets under my skin, and we have to fight each other constantly. Because at the end of the day, these matches they're certainly set out, maybe the outcomes, but what they do in the ring is up to the wrestler themselves. So they were constantly fighting or wrestling each other, and from here kind of bond started to be created, and they actually became really close, as in best friends, the bestest friends anyone could be. I mean, they confided each other, they traveled together, they worked together, they worked out together. And I suppose being in a situation like that, you cling to what you know, and if you find someone you can relate to, their link became so strong. They were pretty much inseparable. But unfortunately, Eddie had the same kind of work ethic as Chris. Chris had children, had this, but everything was work. Everything was work. I mean, it was said Chris wouldn't ask for Father's Day off because he was due to play a match. And one of his friends didn't know if he actually didn't want to ask for the time off or he didn't want the time off. He wanted to continue boxing. So they didn't miss, like, they both kind of sacrificed a lot of home life for their wrestling careers. And again, that just allowed them to knit closer together and become so close. Not that close, but as I say, too close friends, like a real genuine friendship, that there was so much love and respect between them. And from kind of Japan, they then came back to the WCW, which is the World Championship of Wrestling. And the WCW, there was three teamed up. It was Chris, Eddie, and another wrestler by the name of Dan Malenko, and they became the Three Amigos. You know the way you see tag teams? These were the Three Amigos. They were smaller guys, and yeah, they were small. They were not your typical 6'8", I am the Hulk Hogan kind of type. So these guys were called Three Amigos. Now, I'm not going to talk about Chris Benoit without talking about his wife, Nancy. Because Nancy, again, was very involved in wrestling. She was actually one of the first female kind of ring girls and coordinators. Nancy herself was born on the 17th of May, 1964. And she grew up in Florida. But what Nancy actually did, she worked as a model. She was beautiful. She's stunning. Again, I'll put a photo up here. And in her spare time, she actually worked in one of the arenas in Orlando where the wrestling was on, and she sold programs. So make a bit of extra cash, you do you, girl. Her kind of big break, or her introduction into the wrestling world, came in June of 1984, where they needed female characters to be on the front cover of a magazine called the Wrestling All-Stars. And they saw Nancy and we were like, bing bing, she's beautiful. Now this does get a bit complicated because there's a lot of people involved, but I will try and make this as simple. This is all to do with Nancy. There was a main booker at the time named Kevin O'Sullivan. Now, a booker is someone who creates the storylines but is also involved in the wrestling themselves. So she came to team up with Kevin O'Sullivan, and she was known as Fallen Angel. And then they kind of got into a demonic kind of gothic stage as well. So hence she was Fallen Angel, you know, dark clothes, dark makeup, all that jazz. And eventually her and Kevin ended up falling in love and getting married. And when she came back, I think she took a break for a while, but when she came back, rather than being known as Fallen Angel or all this, she was just known clearly as Woman. And she was in charge of Kevin O'Sullivan and whoever he had with him at that stage, and she did everything. She was beautiful. She knew how to work the crowd. She knew how to do the promos. She could do hair, makeup. At one stage in an interview with her sister said if the guys tore their tights, she was in there doing it for them. So Nancy was one of those people that kind of brought women into the world of wrestling, and not just as I'm walking around with a cardboard sign. She played into the kind of theatrics of it, and she really understood the business and how to make it more believable and playable. And she was said to have been absolutely a pioneering woman at this job. And it's sad to say, even in interviews, they say it's kind of a lost art. There's nothing there. Nobody does this anymore because women are wrestling themselves, which is 100%. But it's kind of, they were saying back from them, it's complete lost art. Nobody kind of really understands it or does it anymore. So then we have a meeting of two beautiful people. The Three Amigos were doing so well, and individually they were doing so well, that Kevin O'Sullivan, remember he was a booker of wrestlers and storylines, really wanted to book them. And what he was going to do is, Nancy as Woman was going to leave Kevin O'Sullivan's group and start an affair with Chris Benoit from the Three Amigos. And this thing was going to play out in all those cheesy promo shots that you see, that they were going to have an affair. Unfortunately, it is said that Kevin O'Sullivan booked his own divorce, because in between spending so much time and shooting all these promos and everything for the wrestling community, they actually did start to form a really close friendship. No affair, but a really, really close friendship. And Kevin and Nancy started to have problems. There was allegation of domestic abuse, and she would always turn to Chris in her time of need. They had become such close friends, she would turn to Chris. And eventually, of course, they ended up falling in love, and Kevin and Nancy got divorced. Nancy and Chris then got married, and they'd had Daniel, their child, together before they got married. So Daniel was gorgeous. He was best man at their wedding. Now, Chris did have 2 previous children, David and Megan, from a previous marriage, and they were still really close. His son Daniel is interviewed in a lot of the interviews, and he still said his dad is his hero, which he is. First of all, he's the head of his father. That's a very Irish saying, to say he looks like his father, but he really is genuinely the head of his dad. I think it's his eyes. So they got married and had Daniel, and on the 31st of January 2000, the 3 amigos, which was Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit, they had gone as far as they could within the WCW. They weren't getting promoted, they weren't getting the top spots as much as taller, bigger guys, more muscles, kind of. They weren't getting the main events. So they actually ended up leaving the WCW to come to the WWF Raw. And it was here they were promoted higher up the ranks, and Eddie started introducing Chris to God, to religion, to faith. And it was said that he gave him a Bible, which Eddie gave Chris a Bible, which he took everywhere and always had it. And this kind of where the 3 amigos kind of separate ways. They kind of get self-promoted, so they kind of break off into their own side factions. But Eddie himself had picked up so many injuries over the years. I mean, like, say what you want about wrestling, guys. I haven't watched much in years, so I've done a lot of research on this. No matter what you think of it, you have to be an extreme athlete to do what they do. But Eddie unfortunately had picked up so many injuries, neck, back, concussion, everything like that, that he started to substitute his pain relief with drugs and alcohol, and he became an addict. And it got to a point that he was barely functioning with work. And his wife Vicky had said he had 3 overdoses. The first one she called the ambulance. I think the first and second one she called the ambulance, and on the third one it happened in their house, and she was taking her daughter somewhere, and she said, if you're going to take him, take him. And she was just at her wit's end. So eventually he went into work one day, and he was so high, he was so drunk, they were like, you know what, we're going to have to let you go. You're not functioning. You're a complete mess at the moment. So from there, Eddie was let go, but he started to rebuild his life. I think it was kind of a kick in the teeth. His family had left, he had no job, and he ended up going to rehab and working his way back up, coming back in kind of at ground level and working your way back. And the culmination of this all was in 2004, which was when WrestleMania 20, where there was 2 titles up for grabs, and Eddie being way down and Chris kind of surviving without him. It got to the final and both men won. Chris had won the World Heavyweight Championship while Eddie had won the WWE Championship. And there's this beautiful photo of them so excited. They're hugging on stage, they both have their belts. It's kind of, it came full circle. This is what they did it for. This is probably one of the proudest moments of both their lives, and they could both share with each other. And from here, well, it takes a turn, doesn't it always? This happened in March 2014, and by the November 2015, again, they were still on the road, still traveling, and Chavo, who I mentioned earlier, would have been Eddie Guerrero's nephew, but he was also in the wrestling business. Chavo would kind of notice Eddie sometimes would just nod off mid-conversation, and he was like, nah, that's Eddie. That's Eddie. And they got to a hotel that they were staying in, and they all agreed, it was himself, Chris and Eddie, they all agreed to go training at 6 o'clock the next morning or something like that. And around 5:30, Chavo said that he received a phone call from the phone desk saying there's something wrong with your uncle. And he's like, what do you mean? They were like, he hasn't answered his wake-up call. And when they got to the door, the latch was over, so they literally had to break the latch off it. And Chavo said he went in to the bathroom. Eddie was face down in his boxers, toothbrush still in hand. and he was still alive. He said he was gurgling, but he was still alive. And Chavo said he held him while he passed away. And an interview asked him, going, oh, so when did he relapse? And it was like, he didn't relapse. It was nothing to do with drugs. It was heart disease. Now, to me, the damage could have been done to the heart from the years of abuse. So, but unfortunately, Eddie Guerrero had passed away in November 2005. From here, Chris rings Chavo and says, guys, where are you? I'm downstairs, I'm ready to go training. And he has to let him know his best friend has passed away. And Chavo said the wail was just, he could hear him wailing on the phone. And it was just a man who was broken, who had just got the shock and was broken. And from there, shit really hits the fan. But Eddie had passed away. Chris wasn't handling it. He couldn't handle it. I know there was a tribute show to Eddie Guerrero held by the WWE. Vince McMahon set it up, and it was a lot of his fellow wrestlers doing tributes to Eddie. And there is this haunting image of Chris Benoit in tears saying, I love you, I miss you. It is heartbreaking to watch. But he, from here, then just really didn't deal with it well. They were saying after his funeral, he was sent to Europe. Not sent, he went to Europe to do wrestling. Like, he didn't take any time off. He didn't know how to be around, like, he didn't know how to function without Eddie. And when he was home, he was so upset. He would go to Eddie's house with his wife, and his wife would find Chris on their bed with Eddie's pillow crying, and a lot of the time she would find him in Eddie's gym again crying. And he said to her, and she remembers quote going, I'm lost without Eddie being here. And Chris himself started to really isolate from everyone in the WWE. It was said he could never be found backstage after matches. His whole little world started to close in till he was just kind of self-isolating in himself. And around this time, probably Chris and Nancy were known to have been arguing a lot more. She was so worried about him. Naturally, she was worried. He was cutting himself off with everyone. He was never this person before. So what they did is they decided to get Chris a journal. Now, to me, this sounds like, oh, they got him a journal, but it was such a relief. Like, they got him a journal to write to Eddie, and they said the change in Chris. Like, he spent a lot of time writing in this journal. Now, it was said at the end of it, there was a lot of talk that I'll see you soon, I can't wait to be with you, kind of, we'll be together again, kind of things. But they only came out really after the fact of the incident that happened. So this seemed to kind of revitalise Chris, that he could still technically talk to Eddie, and it was a very therapeutic thing for him. Chris and Nancy were still kind of at odds sometimes, and it never really wanted him to step away from the wrestling world. For him physically, like his body, he was doing diving headbutts, all these kind of suplexes, I don't know what, like grabbing people, and he was doing this. And she goes, mentally, physically, you can only push your body to a certain limit. And from here then, we're going to go to the weekend in 2007 in June. And back to that 911 call. Again, they was on the road, and it was Chavo, Guerrero and Chris. And when they phoned Chris, they're like, man, where are you? And he was like, Nancy and Daniel have food poisoning. I have to stay here. I'll be on the road. This was like over the weekend. He's like, I'll be on the road. I'll be there on Monday. And before he hung up, Chavo said, you know, it was unusual because he was like, Chavo, I love you. And he was like, I love you too, man. Yeah, okay, we'll see ya, kind of thing. And then that night, he had got 2 random text messages from Chris. The first one was saying, the dogs are in the outdoor area and the back door is unlocked. And then an address. And Chavo woke up and he read these and he was like, I don't know what the first message is about, but the second one was an address. Chavo just assumed that's where I have to collect him tomorrow when I'm bringing him to the matches. But what came through then was a second message, and it was sent from Nancy's phone, and it was the exact same thing about the dogs and the back door being opened. And this happened over the weekend, and it came to the Monday where nobody had heard from Chris. No, this happened the Saturday night, nobody heard anything from Chris on the Sunday up until Monday, and it was then they decided to make the welfare call to the PD. And from there then the 3 bodies were discovered, of Nancy, of Daniel and of Chris. Now the WWE were let know at the time, but they weren't privy, say, to the full extent of what had actually happened in the house. And they ran a tribute show for Chris Benoit, and again it was very like Eddie's. A lot of wrestlers came on camera and, you know, talked about Chris himself and Nancy, because a lot of them had worked with Nancy as well. She was a big part of the industry as well. Yes, she had taken time to raise her son, but she was as known as Chris would have been in the wrestling community. What had actually happened, and this is where I'm going to put another viewer's discretion, guys. This is horrible. What investigators say about this is it was a brutal and vicious rage attack. So they say on the night of the 22nd, which was the Friday, Chris and Daniel, his son, had a barbecue. It was a couple of drinks and everything like that. And after Daniel had gone to bed, Chris and Nancy had got into an argument. From here, Chris tied Nancy up, put his knee in her back, broke her spine and strangled her with a telephone cord while placing a Bible beside her bed. Didn't do anything to Daniel that night. So this happened Friday night. So Nancy had passed away, Daniel and Chris went to sleep. The next day it was said that he had given Daniel a Xanax and also strangled him. But they said he strangled him in a way which is one of his wrestling moves. So I don't know, do you know when people put people in a headlock that you can cut off air? I think from what I gather it was something like that. So not only did he drug his child, he killed him in a very vicious and horrible attack, and also placed a Bible beside his bed. In police photos there's actually a picture, I don't know if it was ever planned to be used, but they show Daniel's bed and they actually show a knife underneath it as well. They kind of hypothesized that maybe if the strangulation didn't work, was there a knife going to be used in the killing of the child? They don't know, but it is there. It's clear, very obviously under the bed, that there was a knife from the kitchen brought up to that room. Again on the Saturday night then, Chris went to bed with the 2 dead bodies in his house and got up on Sunday. Now the thing is, when they looked back at Chris's computer on the Sunday, there was internet searches about the book of Elijah from the Bible, which is, sorry I sneezed, which is all about the resurrecting of a dead child. But there was also a internet search on the quickest way to break one's neck. So Chris was drinking on the Sunday. What he went to do is he went down to his home gym and he went to a lap machine. Now a lap machine, I presume, is, you can tell I don't go to the gym, one of these bad boys. Put the cord around his neck, set the weight to 260 pounds and dropped it. And he hung himself. And this happened on the Sunday and the bodies were discovered on the Monday. Again, the WWF were not notified that this is what actually had happened, that it was a murder suicide. And when they realized, they deleted the name of Chris Benoit from WWE history. They were just the act of what he committed and how he went about it. They erased him from WWE history. It's very rarely he's ever talked about, and a lot of the wrestlers were interviewed and they were said, in a few of the interviews I've seen, they're like, it was understood you weren't to talk about Chris or the Benoit name really within the WWE. And they said a lot of them wanted to keep their jobs, so they didn't, and they pretty much erased the name from any history within the WWE. Now, when the news of actually what happened, that it was Familicide, that Chris had killed Nancy, his son, and committed suicide himself, this kind of shone the light really fucking brightly on wrestling, pro wrestling, and there was a lot of kind of discussions and a lot of almost steroid abuse, I have to say, steroid abuse, and this was known as a roid rage and everything like this, and people were saying this was so brutal and so vicious, this had to be a rage he was in. And of course Chris was massive at this stage, so they were like, oh, steroids. When it came out that his autopsy is Chris actually had severely high levels of testosterone in his body, like 10 times the amount in his body, and it also had been known that Chris had been using steroids since high school, and he was 40 when he died, so this was long-term abuse of steroids that he was having. But the kind of WWE came out and said they had a wellness program, which was after Eddie had his drug and alcohol problem, this wellness program came to effect. And this is basically drug testing. Some people say it was really, really strict, but later on text messages between Nancy and Chris were exposed. You can clearly see that Chris was somehow dodging or passing, because he had passed his last wellness before he committed the murders, and then when they did the autopsies the levels were so high. But you can see then text messages of Nancy, and this, like, they were released to the public, and you can tell she knew that he was still using steroids. Clearly he was still using steroids, because some of the messages said, I will not induce this steroid induced roller coaster of emotions. I don't deserve that abuse. Another one was, get off that crap you're using, it's making you passive aggressive and I don't need it. And another one was clearly calling out the WWE by saying, we both know the wellness program is a joke. So Nancy was well aware of the steroids he was on and the kind of changes that Chris had, and ever since Eddie died she could see it more clearly. And again, this added fuel to the fire from the media that it was steroids, the abuse of steroids. There was no way of testing in the WWE or pro wrestling or anything like this, and this is the reason that Chris had snapped and killed his whole family. However, there could have been another reason. And remember those flying headbutts I was talking about? We're going to delve into that side of it. So for years and years, like what's now known about American football, rugby for us over here, any kind of high contact sport, if you're constantly getting hit in the head, there can be concussions. There can be serious lasting effects from concussion, and this can actually be known to actually change a person's behavior and their emotional response to things. So 6 months prior, there was a wrestler called Chris Nowinski. Now there's two Chris's, so I'm going to call Chris Nowinski. He was actually a neuroscientist, so I'm going to call him Doctor, because I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing his name right. So he was also a wrestler though, and 6 months prior to that, Chris Benoit and the doctor were sitting down, and Chris Benoit turns to him and said, oh, I hear you're writing a book about what you're learning about and about how concussion can affect the brain. And he goes, how many concussions have you had? And the doctor was like, oh, I've had 6 and I can remember, and that's too much, so I'm retiring. And when he turned around and asked Chris the same thing, he was like, how many have you had? And Chris was like, no idea. Again, flying headbutt, pretty much used in all the matches. I mean, there was flying headbutts, and back in the day there was these steel chairs that they could use, and it was literally, one of the wrestlers explained it as, you literally had to tense your neck, your shoulders, and take it like a man. And these were real chairs. Yes, some of them are a little bit fake, or like some props are fake and stuff like that, but this was in the kind of 80s, 90s, and he goes, no, you literally had to tense your neck when you knew they were coming, and you took it like a man, and you walked away if you could after. Fucking hell. So this happened 6 months he met this doctor, and Chris Benoit said to him, he's like, will you phone me in a week or so, and I want to talk more about this with you. The doctor said he phoned him the next week, but Chris couldn't talk at that time, and he said he'd phone you back, and that was the last time he ever spoke to Chris. So the theory was out there, did Chris Benoit know something? Did he feel something was changing? Was there something kind of deep down he was like, something's not right? And this was such a shock to the wrestling community, the whole world, that this pro wrestler had snapped over a weekend and killed himself and his family. So the doctor, Chris Nowinski, he said he was a bit fearful, but he did approach Chris Benoit's father after the funeral and explained to him what a concussion can have and how it can affect the brain. And he wanted Chris Benoit's brain. This sounds so mad, but he wanted Chris Benoit's brain because he wanted to see, was there any possible damage or any link between anything that had happened to anything Chris was feeling. And he put it in a way which was just heartbreaking and said, if you get hit in the head enough times, your brain starts to rot. And even when you stop getting hit in the brain, it still degenerates and actually spreads. So you could see why he wanted to check out Chris Benoit's brain and wanted to do examinations on it. And what came back was astounding. Over 80% of Chris Benoit's brain was diseased. It was said he had tau protein pretty much in all of his brain, which this affects mood, emotional responses, your ability to deal with things. This can also cause early dementia, which is forgetfulness, depression, anger, and erratic behavior. And what it came back is Chris Benoit's brain was positive for CTE, which is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Can't pronounce it, so I'll write it down. I'm going to call it CTE. And his brain had such a high standard of it, it was like his brain was an 80-year-old dementia patient. So you come to the conclusion this was either the factor or a contributing factor along with the steroids that could have caused Chris, especially with the emotional trauma, his best friend Eddie passing away and never being able to really deal with it, never giving himself time to deal with it. Was this a contributing factor in what happened that weekend in June? And Michael Benoit, which was Chris's father, said about the situation at the time, I agreed to the testing after Nowinski explained the desire to extend the knowledge of brain damage which can occur to athletes who have constant head injuries. And Michael Benoit Sr., he knew this wasn't his son. He knew this wasn't like his son. Like, how can he go from a loving, humble father to just the atrocities he did? And he was like, he was quoted saying, I was shocked to learn the extent of the damage and saddened that he could have been suffering from this without anyone's knowledge, even without his own knowledge. And this is like so poignant, because him asking for the doctor to phone him and explain more about what his research in neuroscience was and what the things of concussion and how CTE can occur. I mean, he was clearly, something had clicked that maybe this is a reason that I'm feeling like this. And this nearly took down the pro wrestling world with regards to steroids and the wellness program not kind of adding up to the levels of hormones. But from this, it completely changed the CTE protocol. And I think everyone's seen that when coming into American football, rugby over your HIA, which is basically concussion. They have to check with the player. If there's any query, the player comes off. I mean, and especially within wrestling, chair shots were not allowed unless they were protected, as in they're still steel chairs, but you kind of make the most of it. And it brought into kind of the priority of the health of the wrestler. It was all about protecting the athlete, which, as again in most sports it is now, because they can have seen the detrimental effects of CTE can have. And a few of the wrestlers that were interviewed in it as well that I saw, they're wondering, like Chavo Guerrero actually said, he goes, I was wrestling for 20 years. I more than likely have some type of CTE, how extent. And the flying headbutt, I mean, clues in the title. You're flying at the air through speed using your head. And there was two main actual wrestlers. One was called Harley Race, and he ended up, I think he was the fella who kind of really came up with the flying headbutt, and he said, I'm sorry I ever did, because he suffered from severe spinal injuries. And the Dynamite Kid, who was such an idol to Chris when he was younger, who also did the flying headbutt, he actually ended up losing the use of his legs. His left leg, he was wheelchair bound and he was told he'd never walk again. So, I mean, but again, hindsight is a great thing. I mean, yeah, we can all say now, from the knowledge we have now, kind of, oh yeah, of course, why would you do that? But that's, hindsight is 2020. Again, as mentioned, the tribute show that they showed the night of Chris, that Monday night that Chris and Nancy and Daniel were all pronounced dead, this was the only mention of Chris Benoit in the WWE since. Although there is an understanding of CTE and of the steroids and one conflicting or one causing it, they do say it was more CTE than the steroid use, but he was using for steroids so long, so it's hard to say. They understand it can be that wasn't their Chris, that wasn't the pro wrestler Chris. But to this day, there has never been a mention of Chris Benoit. And people still debate. There is a WWE Hall of Fame, and so many people have said, no, don't want him in it. Can't even, not a chance, not after what he did. But a lot of call for his wife, Nancy, who was very much an independent before she got with Chris, was her own literally woman within the wrestling community. And I just found this remark really hard. I think it's Chris Jericho said, you know, I'd love to see Nancy Benoit, and he kind of corrects himself. He goes, you can't even say the Benoit name. I would love woman to be in the Hall of Fame. And I think that's the hard side. I mean, yes, what he did, unforgivable, atrocious, horrendous. But at the end of it, you're just like, how much did medical disease have to do with it? And just, it's just such a horrible case, and it's a heartbreaking case because it's only now, and only from, like all dementia patients, it's only when they pass away can you examine their brain. You obviously can't go in depth when people are alive. Yes, I 100% agree he could have fucking done it to himself and fucked off, left the 9-year-old and his wife alone. I 100% agree with that. And to take out your family, I mean, I know he was suffering, but to take out your family, there's just something diabolical and really, really sickening. Basically, they were saying, and a lot of people have said, Chris never dealt with Eddie passing away, one of his closest people in the world. He isolated himself, and he kind of sealed his fate from that day. He sealed it in a way that even if he wanted to, or even if he knew what was going on, he didn't ask anyone. He felt like he couldn't ask anyone. He didn't put himself out there to ask anyone. So that's the hardest part of it. Never mind CTE or steroid use, anyone with mental issues, mental health issues, anything like that. It's hard to ask for help to begin with. But if you're suffering from other things and you've isolated yourself so much that you feel like you can't ask anyone, I mean, that's just unfortunately a fucking recipe for disaster. So guys, that is the cruel, flawed mind and murders of Chris Benoit, Nancy Benoit, and their son Daniel. It's a hard one. Again, I feel like all the cases I'm doing at the moment are just like, I mean, yes, do I agree he should have done to himself and not dragged his family into it? Yes. But did he even think of that? Because where his state of mind was, he was in grief, he was probably in with steroid, well, he was full of steroids as well, but also the CTE could have taken effect. With the extent of his brain and the damage that was done to it, his fate unfortunately was sealed. So guys, that is my first True Crime Thursday. I hope this sparks a discussion down below. Let me know what you think. Like, I'd really love to know your thoughts on this. What side of the fence would you lie on? I think we all will be in agreement that Chris Benoit was sick mentally and physically from his whole body being fucked. But do you feel that CTE should be able to use an excuse or not? I'm torn because coming from a medical background, I can see it very like, oh, this is the reason that. Coming in from an emotional side, I'm like, you fucking dickhead. Sorry, but I do. But I want to start a discussion down below, guys. Please let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about this setup. I think I'm going to stick with this one now again. I know I said I moved in my last video, but I've actually completely changed around from the opposite side of the room now. Still keeping the camera there. But don't forget, guys, unforgettablemurders@gmail.com if you ever want me to talk about murders that you have had interest in and you want to delve more in, or you want to talk about, or you want to have a discussion, pop it down there. Yeah, I love you. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Be cool, be calm, and wear your goddamn masks. Hope you enjoyed. Love you. Bye.